Who can tell us about the kind of leadership it takes to shape the future? The House Minority Leader for the Georgia General Assembly, that's who. Stacey Abrams is here. I'm Dr. Ralph Basui Watkins. Let's talk it out. So much of today's public discourse involves yelling, interrupting, and attacks designed to hurt someone rather than hear them. Whatever happened to dialogue that builds bridges? In the Christian scriptures, the book of Romans, chapter 14 and verse 19, it encourages us to pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. That is the approach I will take as we engage in conversation on some of the most crucial issues of our time. Again, I'm Dr. Ralph Basui Watkins, and today we're having a conversation about leadership and shaping the future. Our guest today happens to know quite a bit about leadership. She is Stacey Abrams, House Minority Leader for the Georgia General Assembly, State Representative for the 89th House District, attorney, author, entrepreneur, and Democratic gubernatorial, how do you say the word? Governor. She's a candidate for governor. She's a candidate for governor. So welcome to Talk It Out.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here. Now, let me ask you this question that is burning inside of me. I know you're a person of faith, but you're a politician. Something that's kind of oxymoronic. So how does your faith inform your politics?
So I grew up in southern Mississippi. My mom was a librarian, my dad was a shipyard worker, but they were very involved in the church. So involved that at the age of 40, they packed up their 6 children and moved to Georgia to become United Methodist ministers. So I come from a family of faith. But my parents were always very clear that their faith was not transitive. We had to find our own faith. My mom would say she wasn't taking us to heaven with her. We had to get there on our own. And so for me, faith is grounded in the notion of service. It is about who we serve and how we demonstrate that service. I happen to be Christian. And so for me, not only being a Christian, but also coming from the tradition of John Wesley, I believe in an active engagement of my faith, an active demonstration of service. That led me into politics because I believe that government is one of the purest examples of our humanity. It is people serving one another and investing in the service of one another. And so the politics is a method, it's a mechanism and a method to deliver that service, and it's why I'm in politics.
So, I'm Baptist now, but I was Methodist, African Methodist Episcopal. Mm-hmm. And out of that tradition, Richard Allen talked about justice, right? That for as a person of faith, key to my faith is this notion of justice and equity and fairness. Can you talk a bit about how that also informs your work in the world?
The world that I want to live in is one where we believe in equality, but we also try to deliver equity. And those are two different things. Equality says that your status and my status should not matter, that we should all have the same opportunities. And then equity says that in the achievement of those, there should be no diminution of who you are or in who I am. Justice says that we have to work hard to deliver that because people naturally aren't going to do it. We're always going to try to help ourselves and those we love. Government steps in, business steps in, nonprofits step in to create that sense of equity and to lift up that equality. For me, probably the best example is the work that I've done with the New Georgia Project. We live in a state where we're all entitled to vote, but in 2014, 800,000 people of color did not believe that their franchise belonged to them.
Wait, say that number again.
800,000 unregistered people of color in Georgia in 2014. So I launched a voter registration project called the New Georgia Project. But we didn't just do voter registration. We then did voter education to make certain people understood. It's like handing someone the keys to the car. If you don't teach them to drive, the keys are irrelevant. And so we registered them, but then we also helped them understand how to vote, where to vote, and why to vote. And then the next step is voter participation, actually turning them out. And for me, the New Georgia Project is the embodiment of that sense of justice, making certain that people of color in the state of Georgia had the same rights and access. The piece that I'm most proud of is that the New Georgia Project, since 2014, has registered more than 200,000 people of color, and we're well on our way of our goal to register all 800,000 by 2024.
Some people say to me sometimes, look, Reverend, Jesus wasn't political. I say that he was, and that politics has no place in the church, and you're talking about this all the time about we need to be active, we need to be engaged. Give me some how you reconcile that, right, that as a person of faith. And then on the other side of this equation, I'm a registered Democrat. My politics can be kind of liberal, but I think it's more liberative if I defined it in my own context. How do we talk about this, right, across the aisle? How do you think about talking to folk who think of faith differently, who may be conservative in their politics and their theology, and those who may say that, faith and politics didn't go together, and that was not Jesus' agenda?
I think they need to go back and read the Bible again. My younger sister and I attend the same church. She went to Bible study this week, and she was telling me about the conversation where our pastor responded to a similar query. The Bible's not political? And he said, of course it's politics. It's about kings. It's about, it literally is about principalities. Principalities are governments. That's just before we got to democracy. So inherent in the Bible is the conversation of how do we live together where we have some who have dominion, some who have nothing, where you have slavery and attempts to grapple with the questions of who has rights and who doesn't have rights. Paul is all about the conversation of where do women fit into our world. The entire conversation about the enslavement of the Jews, the enslavement in Egypt, is a conversation about rights based on race. The Bible is political. The question is, what politics do we learn from that? And what I learned is that we should always be in pursuit of the highest form of politics, which is that people have access, that they have the opportunity to succeed, that the Lord doesn't want us to suffer. I was always disturbed as a child by that scripture, the poor will always be among us, because I felt that people took that as an excuse, not as a challenge. Our challenge is to eradicate poverty, not to become comfortable with it. And that is a purely political idea. The idea that we're going to fight to make sure everyone has access, not just those who come with the most.
And for me, that's how I understand the gospel, right? That's what the gospel's about. That it's interesting when you see Jesus walking along the way. He always gave access to folk who they tried to deny access to.
Absolutely.
And I think about that too. I think about my understanding of faith, and as you articulate yours as well, this issue of helping, right? This issue of lifting people up. And I've heard something about you that you say to your staff. You say to your staff, we always ask people, what is it? How can I help
How can I help?
Talk about that. And where does that come from?
So, at the legislature, I'm literally the first name that you get to. My last name is Abrams. And so we get a lot of phone calls for people who don't want to talk to me, would never vote for me, don't know who I am, but I'm the first name. And my staff, when when I first became leader, would send people to their appropriate representative. And the first time I heard them do that, I said, no, we don't do that. We solve the problem for them. And if it is getting them to someone else, we'll do that, but we find out what their problem is. We have to begin saying, how can I help you? How can I solve this problem for you? How can I serve you? My parents raised us to do three things: go to church, go to school, and take care of each other. And for me, that ethic of service is why I do what I do, whether in business or in politics or in the nonprofit space like the New Georgia Project. I'm driven by the belief that my responsibility is to serve, that my purpose is to serve. And I want those who work with me and for me to inculcate that, to know that that is who they are as well. Because when you begin by thinking about how can I serve someone else, it changes your demeanor. You're not angry about how long it takes. You're not frustrated. What you are is you're passionate. And more importantly, you learn something new. There's a satisfaction in knowing that someone's life got a little bit better because you took a few minutes to do something to move them forward.
So, Spelman grad, then you go to UT Austin, Yale-trained lawyer. Why aren't you at some law firm? Because I'm telling you this story. I want to be a lawyer. Okay. I want to be a big-time corporate lawyer and make millions of dollars, which was antithetical to everything my mother taught me and trained me to be. Then I married this wonderful woman who said, no, you're not. Then I met this God who said, you're going to become a preacher. So you know how that story goes, right? Yes. So give me the sense of, tell me a little about this journey, right? Not only that, this author, this entrepreneur, why didn't you just go become a big partner in a law firm, make big dollars and cents in rock and roll and just write novels?
My family seems to have a congenital predisposition against making money. I try really hard.
We're in the same family, but
yeah,
go ahead.
But for me, when I was privileged to be a tax attorney at Sutherland, Asbill and Brennan, it's now Evershed Sutherland, and I did make a lot of money. I made more money. I paid more money in taxes than my parents' combined income the year I went to law school. That disturbed me and them. It was nice, but my sense of future always said that I wanted to be in service. I actually thought I would be a really good bureaucrat. I didn't actually intend initially to run for governor. I thought maybe one day I'd run for mayor. But what pushed me along and what made me leave the law firm was a recognition, both practical and philosophical. Philosophical, I wanted to do more, and billable hours just didn't cut it. Practical, I wasn't billing enough hours, and I was doing an inordinate amount of pro bono work. We had really awkward conversations, me and the leadership at the law firm. Like, Stacey, we think you're really smart, but we can't cover the cost of your salary with what you do. But I was doing all the pro bono work for many of the partners. I love the law. I'm a tax attorney by training. It has been an amazing learning experience, and it's a set of skills that I value. But I want more for the people I serve. I want more for the state where I live. And I want to use my skills for people who could never afford to hire me. So I went on what my mother calls my trajectory of downward economic mobility. So I went from being a tax attorney to being deputy city attorney, and then ran for state office.
Wow, what a journey. But I sense it's a call for you.
It is.
Talk about that sense of call.
So I joke with my parents. When you have two parents who are ministers, every time you feel the Spirit, you're deathly afraid that you're being called into the ministry, and I don't want to go. But I believe my ministry is government. If you think about Esther, if you think about Micah and the conversations in the scripture, government is a service. It is a ministry. When you are helping people live their lives, when you are making certain that their corporeal being is served as well as their spirit. I will leave their spirit to you and to my parents, but I want to make certain that the mom who's trying to raise her daughters to be strong, smart women, that she doesn't have to worry about whether or not they're going to be able to go to college. I want that father who is working that third job just to make sure he makes ends meet. I want him to be able to dream about what he wants next. I want the victim of a crime to know that justice will come, but I also want the person who committed the crime to know that redemption will come. That, to me, is who we should be as people, and government is the best way I know to get that done.
Well, I'll keep preaching. She'll keep running. And this conversation will keep going. This is a great conversation, but we need to take a short break. We'll be right back to talk more about leadership and Stacey's vision for the state of Georgia. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our guest today is Stacey Abrams, minority leader in the Georgia House of Representatives. And she's also running for governor. Did I mention that? So let me ask this question, because we're talking about leadership. And I wonder, as I think about you as a leader, what will your leadership look like? What kind of issues are you passionate about that may resonate with our audience?
I think there are two parts to that. What my leadership will look like in terms of actually who you hire, I hope is reflected in my campaign. We began our campaign in Albany. We then went to Macon and Dalton, to Savannah and Hinesville and Riceboro. We've been to DeSoto, and we've been in Atlanta. But I wanted to make certain that people understood I was running for governor of the entire state of Georgia, not the governor of Atlanta. But also in terms of the racial composition and the gender composition and the dynamism of my campaign. Our team looks like, you and I are old enough to remember the United Colors of Benetton. Yeah. They are multiracial, but they're also from different communities. Because you and I both know being African American doesn't make you monolithic. So we've tried to cut across almost every set of experiences, urban and rural, suburban, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, African American, white, LGBT, non-LGBT, straight, those who come from privilege, those who've never known privilege. Had a young man who just left my campaign. He was an intern, and he was going to West Point. He is openly gay, and he talked about the fact that working for me was about working for someone who respected all of his service, not just his military service, but what it meant for him to be in a position to help me get into the governor's mansion. And when I think about what I want to do, I want to create a state where everyone believes that this is possible. I grew up in a family that is working class / working poor. My mom called us the genteel poor. We had no money, but we had class and we watched PBS. And for us, the conversation was about education, and that's one of my most important issues. And education doesn't begin in kindergarten. As your wife knows, education begins from the day you come into this earth. So it's high quality daycare, it's expanded pre-K, and then it's not just adequacy in education, it's excellence in education K through 12. It's making certain that we believe our children are capable of more and that we educate them for more. The way I talk about it is we have to educate bold and ambitious children from cradle to career. Free technical college, and then making sure that college is affordable. Hope Scholarship is a fantastic thing, but it has been a merit-based program since 1995. We have to put need-based in there because a good C student can do a great job too. But education is one piece. The second piece is economic development. We have to think about growing jobs in place. And as much money as we're willing to spend to steal jobs from Indiana, we have to be willing to invest in jobs here at home. I've started companies. Some have succeeded, some have failed. But what I know is true is that you need someone who believes in not only your idea, but is willing to put capital behind it. And we need to be a state that puts as much money and as much of our investment behind the barber who wants to add a second or third chair so that young man can get off the street, get a license, and build a base, as we are willing to put into Baxter Pharmaceuticals. Both are important, but they change our lives in different ways. But we also have to believe that it's not about moving to Atlanta or Columbus or Savannah to get a job. That if you live in Taylor County, you should be able to grow your family there. And if your family decides to move, that's their decision, it's not necessity. And so I want an economic plan that really helps people grow in place, where we build a thriving and diverse economy. But what ties that all together for me is good government. If your government works for you and with you, we can achieve anything. But if our government is in opposition to us through voter suppression, through criminal injustice, we won't move where we need to. I have been privileged to work with the current governor on criminal justice reform. And it's personal to me because I have a younger brother who's in prison. My oldest sister is a professor. I have a sister who's a federal judge. I have a brother who's a social worker, a sister who's an evolutionary biologist, and I have a brother who dropped out of Morehouse College because of drug addiction, and he turned to crime. But Walter deserves the same opportunities when he gets out, and I want to be the governor of a state that welcomes him and says, we see a path forward for you as well. And so for me, the conversation about the state we want to have is a state where everyone can succeed, not just survive. We spend too much time talking about survival, and going back to the conversation of faith, I believe my God wants more for me than just survival. He wants my success. He wants my prosperity, not in terms of taking from others, but he wants me to be prosperous in who I am and how I can engage my world.
You know, when I hear you talk, I think about people say to me, I remember when President Barack Obama ran, and I was a Hillary supporter. And my mother was a politician, and I was a strong Hillary supporter. And I said, this guy is going to win. At the time, I was in California, and he came to speak at our church, First AME Church in California, in Los Angeles. And I was so impressed with him. I began to follow him and study him, and ended up supporting him for presidency. But I remember even on the night of the election, I remember I was the first, Vanessa and I got up that morning to go vote. I was the first one at the polls, you know. I'd never had a chance to vote for a person who I was so adamant about his platform, his policy, his ideas, and his vision for our country. But I remember voting that morning saying, is this really going to happen? So that night at church, we had a watch party. And I remember being in the basement of First AME Church, and, you know, CNN projects. And I said, wow, this happened. But I remember up until that point, I said, he can't win, right? I'm going to vote for him. I'm going to give him money every month, right? And I'm talking about you, and people say, she's not going to win. And I would say, well, do you remember? And I would tell the story, right, about this grassroots campaign, about how we as churches got behind and worked hard and registered and made sure folk got out and voted. So when someone says, come on, are you serious? And then I also want you to kind of speak through this kind of reductionness, kind of reducing your campaign and your candidacy to your gender and your ethnicity. Can you talk about those two things?
Sure. So I think that I describe my candidacy both in terms of math and message. And when they're added together, you get to my mission. The math is that there are enough Democrats in Georgia for us to win every election going forward. If you look at the composition of our state, Georgia is 53% white, non-Hispanic, 47% people of color. That's important because race is probably one of the most formidable markers of political attitude. And we have a core coalition available to us of progressive whites, of African Americans, of Latinos, of Asian Pacific Islanders. What we haven't done as a party is actually work to talk to the entirety of our coalition. We spend most of our money trying to convince Republicans that they want to be Democrats. To me, that's the moral equivalent of trying to convince an atheist he wants to be a Catholic. My job is just to get Baptists to go to church.
Amen to that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And in doing so, it gets to the message. If you want Baptists to go to church, it's not just about Easter Sunday. It's what are you doing the other days of the week? What do they see in you that's going to make them change their behavior? We spend a lot of time trying to change ideology. I don't want you to change what you believe. I want you to act on what you believe. And that is about the message that I carry. And my message resonates in Dalton and in Albany. It resonates in Kirkwood. And just last night I was in Toco Hills. I go to places because people, when they see me, tell themselves a story about who I am and what I can and cannot be. My mission is to make certain they can move past that. And so to your question about the reductive nature of how people think about my candidacy, we had an intern, we have an all-staff meeting, and one of them asked me about that, and he was righteously indignant on my behalf. He's like, they just talk about you as a black woman. And what I said is, look, it means something to people when they see me, because to see a black woman positioned for this race tells them that I've done something. I've overcome barriers. I've gotten beyond some of the things that hold the rest of us back. And they want to know how I did it and how can I take those lessons and lift them up. And so I'm okay with that. For other people, it's about redefining what leadership means to them. And I'm good with that. But I think the largest piece of it is the historical nature of my candidacy says that you can trust that I'm going to work hard because I've had to work hard my entire life to get here. If you start with the fact that I'm a black woman, that's fine. But if you stop there, then I lose. I refuse to let anyone stop there. And that's why I'm going to go across the state. I'm going to talk to voters. I'm going to bring out the people we've left behind and the people we've ignored. And I'm going to make sure their voices are the loudest voices. Because if we are willing to do that, if we're willing to lift up those families and have a message for them, the math will work and the mission will be accomplished.
In the few minutes we have left, talk a bit about your style. As I studied you, one of the key things I see in you is collaboration and cooperation. That you as a minority leader are always reaching across the aisle, building alliances, relationships, having conversations, that you don't exclude folk, you include folk. Talk a bit about that.
I get myself in a little bit of trouble because I do work very well with the Republican Party. But here's why. Real people's lives are impacted by what we do. I grew up in southern Mississippi, the victim of government sometimes, the victim of politics. People who were playing games, trying to one-up each other, forgetting that if this person wins or this person loses, it's irrelevant at the Capitol if my family loses in the end. And so I begin every conversation thinking about who is the real person who's going to be impacted by this decision. And so where it is necessary, I will work with anyone to broker deals to make sure the most people are served. Hope Scholarship is a perfect example. Some students had to take a reduction of $1,000, and that is painful, and I don't dismiss it. But we were able to save pre-K. We were able to preserve and create scholarship opportunities for students who've been pushed out of the system altogether. And the places where we weren't successful in the technical college space, I worked with our team, including with my opponent in the primary, to bring legislation back to fix that. Because real lives had to be changed, and 4-year-olds don't get a do-over. I will also fight, though, for the things I believe in. And the reality is, if you're going to fight, people are going to ignore you if all you do is fight. If they know that for you, it's just about the fight. But when I fight, they know that my first thought was, how do I get it done? And if I get to the place where I'm fighting with you, it's because you won't do what you need to do, and I'm going to fight tooth and nail to make it happen. Because I will work first together to do collaborative solutions. But I also have core beliefs that say that no matter what, I'm going to make sure it gets done. And I think that's the kind of leader you want. Someone who wants to work together, but will never, ever stop getting to where we need to be.
Got a minute left, but I want to get this question in. Millennials,
yes,
younger people, how do you see this relationship with the more senior leadership and this next generation? Why is it important for this generation, specifically millennials, to be involved in this campaign and in this season in the life of our country?
I think whether you are Christian or Muslim or Jewish, whether you are Buddhist, Black, white, Latino, Asian, this is your country. This is your future. And Georgia is the state that embodies all of those differences. My responsibility as a candidate is to make sure I am building behind me the people who will take over. Because if I do my job well, they will all believe that this is their state. And you want millennials to own it. They should believe that their future depends on whether I'm elected. And so I've hired some of the smartest, most talented, most diverse young people I can find because I want them to tell me how to do this. I'm not a millennial, I'm Generation X. But I need them to say, here's what we need to hear from you. Here's what we need to see. But I also need the same thing from senior citizens who know that their time may be coming to an end, but they want the best that they can have. And those my age who are still making new choices and have families to care about, I want us all to believe, but I think a good leader lifts up, but also pushes people beyond themselves. I want my team to need to hire. I want to get a job from them one day. That's my mission.
I love it. This has been great. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have to pause right here. I want to thank my guest, Stacey Abrams, Georgia House Minority Leader and candidate for governor. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for listening. Oh, don't leave, because guess what? Up next, my final thoughts. Here's what I think. I think about Fannie Lou Hamer. I think about Ella Baker. I think about those persons who gave their lives for us to have the right to vote, for those who fought for women to have the right to vote. I think about the fact that my faith calls me to be civically engaged, to create the kind of society that reflects the justice and liberation of our God. A God who died on the cross for the least of these. A God who fed the hungry. A God who healed those who stopped by the way. A God who met people's needs. And when I talk to people like Stacey Abrams, they remind me of what we are called to do as people of faith. Be you Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or even atheist. Aren't we called to do good? Aren't we called to make this world a better place? And when I talk to people like Stacey Abrams, I'm reminded of the call to create a more just society, to create a world where the least of these have an opportunity to live a whole and complete life. We have a right to quality education, that we have a right to equal justice. It's important. But we have the world that we create, the world that we fight for, the world that we stand for. We must show up and make a difference. And when I talk to people like Stacey, I'm reminded that we the people can make a difference. That we the people can make the impossible possible. We can make dreams come true. I said as I was talking to him, I didn't believe that Barack Obama could ever be elected president. But he was. And maybe one day in Georgia, we'll break some of those barriers as well. Well, that's what I think. We also know what you think. Write to me at programming@aibtv.com and follow me on Twitter at Ralph Basui. Remember, you may very well change your world if you'll just talk it out. I'm Dr. Ralph Basui Watkins. I'll talk to you soon.